Ով Քրիստոս կենթանի գրակ, քո երգիր նետած սիրո գրակովը փորփոքե մեր անձերը, որ այրե մեր հոգիներուն աղդերը, սրբե մեր մտածումներուն խղճերը, մաքրե մեր մարմիններուն մեղքերը եւ քու գիտության լույսը վարե մեր սիրտերուն մեջ եւ ողորմե քու արարածներուդ եւ մեզի բազմամեղենուս ամեն.
With that, I will pass the microphone to Dr. Jesse Arlen.
Thank you, Deacon Adam, and thank you to all for being present here for the third lecture in the series on St. Nersess. And I'm very excited for tonight's speaker, who I would say is a phenomenon in our community, Matthew Sarkisian. He, by trade or by training, by career, has worked in his family's construction business. He doesn't know modern Armenian and has never taken a formal class of Armenian. And yet, over the last, I think, several years, his interest in classical Armenian and in Kurapar, the language of our church, has increased. And over the last couple years, has devoted so much of his time to translating classical Armenian texts into English. And we started working together in the context of the Kurapar Yevkini classical Armenian reading group. And Matt just blossomed in that group and really took off on his own. And he also has excellent computer and web skills, excellent at least compared to me. And so he helped develop the website for Kurapar and Kini and manages that. And when I saw the way that he was translating and preparing classical Armenian texts into English, I said, you know, we have to take this further and bring out some of these translations to a wider audience. So the first book that we worked on together that Matt translated was a scroll, a Hamayil. And we published that as an ebook that's available on the Zohrab Center website. And the next project that he started working on, we consulted together, and he's prepared a translation of 60 of Nersess Ali's odes, the Daghs, which I mentioned briefly last time. And we're in the process of editing those and putting final touches on those. That'll be published at the end of this year or early next year. And I asked him if he would share a bit, you know, based on his study, his immersion in these 60 odes of St. Nersess Ali, which he can talk more about. But I just want to especially point out what a unique and special thing it is to have someone who has no background in Armenology or patristics or advanced training at the graduate level, has never even formally taken an Armenian class, but is just a faithful member of the community, a faithful parishioner who's taken a deep interest in this language and in our theological and spiritual culture, and has decided on his own initiative to take it to the next level and to not be afraid to write and produce and translate things. And I think he's a great example, and I hope to see many more Matthew Sarkisians in the future. And with that, I welcome you to let us talk to us tonight about the Odes of St. Nersess Ali.
Well, thank you for that, Jesse. And I joked with Jesse last week about this, and I think he just killed my timeline because his introduction to me was going to be about 30 seconds long, and he kind of stretched it out longer than he should have, because I'm not a scholar. Like he says, I'm learning this stuff as I go along. I think I'm a decent writer, but I don't speak well. My brain and my mouth work at different speeds, so I'm going to be fumbling my words tonight, and probably going to talk too fast. So maybe Jesse can like kick me under the table if I talk too fast, and I'll try to slow down. Let me start first. Let me share. Jesse says I'm good with technology. I was getting my slideshow ready, putting it on a laptop, and the font, which is embedded in the slideshow and on the computer, was not showing the punctuations in the Armenian. So I was like, oh my God, this is 6 o'clock and I'm panicking. What am I going to do? So my slideshow's on a PDF. So we're going to work from that. So let me share that. If I may, if I could figure out how. There it is. So can everyone see this? Oops, wrong page. Let me start from the beginning. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, but if you made it full screen, it would be better for
Make it full screen.
if you go to view. There should be a full screen option
In Zoom or on my thing?
on your PDF, on your Adobe reader. If you go to view, there
Or is
should
that better? That's as big as it's going to get. It's full screen on mine.
if you know how there's like file, edit, view. If you go to view, enter full screen, that will do a full screen for us.
File, view, Zoom, full screen mode. How's that?
Yes, that's perfect.
That's as big as it's going to get. So like I say, I'm not a scholar, and Jesse was talking about, I'm translating these odes. I want to talk about two different things. First of all, what a dagh is. What is an ode in terms of the poetic characteristics of it? What makes this a unique characteristic in Armenian, unique genre in Armenian? And then what they were used for, what they were written for. And that's like the first part. And then the second part, I want to talk about some of the content, pick some examples and talk about some of the content in the ode. And Jesse, since I don't speak Armenian, I can read some words that Jesse has also agreed to read some of the Armenian for me when I need to. So as Jesse said, we're working on this book, and hopefully this year, hopefully October, November timeframe, we'll get it published. Translations of 60 of his odes. The odes that I translated, 58 of them were from this little book, Poetic Writings of Lord Nersess The Graceful, Catholicos of America. A little 3x5 book. It has some other poetic works of St. Nersess in it, but I just looked at the odes. And the other two were from another source, and I wanted to use the other source because this book did not have any odes related to the church, like the Armenian church. So I picked them from another source. So let's talk about what an ode is, or what a dagh is. So the word dagh is usually translated into English as ode, and that's the word I used in my translation in this presentation. But what is an ode? What does the English word ode mean? I mean, it's not like an ode on a Grecian urn, like you might think of. It's what does ode mean in the Bible? Because that's what we're looking for. That's what in the patristic fathers, that's what they were thinking in terms of ode. The English word ode is derived from the Greek word ode, and it occurs in the Septuagint, and that's the Greek Old Testament that they translated like the 1st or 2nd century BC. And interestingly, the word dagh does not occur in the Armenian Bible. So the word ode, the word dagh came about later. And in the Bible, where there's the Greek word ode, like in the beginning of the Psalms, those title passages to the Psalms, the word ode is translated into Armenian as ortnutun, praise. So we have like from Psalm 30 or 29, whichever book you're looking at, Psalmos odes, Sagmos ortnutians, a psalm of praises. So an ode, in terms of what I'm talking about, is an expression of praise, and it's done in a certain way with certain poetic features. And I said the word dagh does not occur in the Bible. The word dagh does not even occur in the odes themselves, which is surprising, but it's found in the titles. But there are some problems with the titles, and I'll show on the next page. These are titles to one ode that are different sources. The bottom here in the book that I was working on, Poetic Writings of Lord Nersess The Graceful, it's under the section Daghs, and this book was published in 1830. And this ode is entitled to the Holy Trinity. So going back to 1241, one manuscript, this manuscript was copied just 68 years after St. Nersess died. It's not even a full title. It's Diaron Ners, Lord, and it's abbreviation of Diaron Nersessi or Nersessi, Lord Nersesses. So it doesn't say Dagh in that. 140 years later, there's this title in 1381. Lord Nersess's Song of the Children of the Church for the Coexistent Holy Trinity and One Divinity in harmony with the heavenly ranks. And that's quite a title for a ode that's only six lines long. And many of these words are right from the ode itself, like in harmony, Hamatzainalov, and coexistent. Those words are right out of the ode itself. So what it looked like to me is that some scribe, when copying this ode from one text to another, thought it needed a title and gave it this title. It's a pretty lengthy title. So a little later, 1394, another long title, almost the same as the one before that. And then this one manuscript from the 14th century, and the date is unsure on that, but sometime in the 14th century, some scribe adds Dag sur hoc vuin, Ode for the Holy Spirit. So of all these earlier versions of the titles, this is the first time that the word Dagh comes about. So I think it's safe to say that St. Nersess did not call this genre Dagh or ode. I think he may not even have put titles on it. And then later on, someone else came and decided this what this genre is. This type of genre is a Dagh. This other type of genre is a Kant, and so on and so forth. But someone later on came up with the title Dagh for it. So what makes a Dagh a Dagh? And before I answer this, I'm going to answer, we're going to answer it over time, is I have not looked at odes from other authors. I have not done any research on what the genre means. I'm just basing what I'm going to talk about tonight is what I read and how I understand what I read in St. Nersess's odes. So let's see what he has to say for him. So Jesse, would you read the Armenian, please?
Nor imen e hynchun anteraga yerkvuis. Yerk ner dagagan hoknasterian rachjan.
So this is what he says in an ode to the Holy 40. Some new sound is present in this song, a metrical song, a multi-starred festive feast. And there's the clue there. Yerk ner dagagan, metrical song. So as far as I see, what's considered an ode is a song with meter. So I looked at, in the 60 odes that I translated, what are the primary features of the Daghs, and meter was the primary one. And what I mean by meter, specifically regarding these odes, is a consistent number of syllables per line. There are some other odes had some different features involving meter, and we might see some of those later when we talk about individual odes, but consistent syllables per line is meter in these odes. Of the 60 odes that I translated, 57 of them have meter consistent syllables per line. That's per line. So 95% of them, just about all of them, have meter. One ode had 7 syllables per line. One had 18 syllables per line, but most were like 12, 13, 14. 14 and 15 were like fairly common. The next feature of the odes is melody. Unfortunately, there's really nothing in the odes that says whether or not St. Nersess wrote them with an actual melody in mind. But they were songs. He called them songs. And just about everything in the Armenian church is done with singing or chanting. I need to move that. Okay. So On the right here, this is the manuscript from a Dagaran, an ode book. It was copied in 1662. And this is actually an ode of St. Nersess is in it. And you'll see in the first line some of the Daghs notation. So someone at some point has decided this should have a melody. And melodies probably changed over time just because copyists didn't copy them down and someone else came up with a melody. But I think it's safe to say that these were intended to be sung with a melody. And if you notice, the notations are mainly in the first line or the first stanza. They're not so much in the later stanzas, and that's because these odes had a regular rhythm. They had regular syllable patterns, so the melody would have been the same in each stanza. So you didn't have to copy all the different ones out. Let me. Oops, that was two things. So the next feature, this is of odes, is an acrostic, and this is actually pretty cool. This feature, and let me just. There are two types of acrostics, and I don't know if there's technical literary terms for them, but one that I call a word acrostic, and that's where the first letter of each line or the first letter of each stanza, when taken together, spells something. And a little story here, you know, 6-7 months ago when I was translating these, I looked online and found some Dagarans digitized online. I was looking through them to see if I can find an example of one of St. Nersess's odes, and particularly I was looking to see if I could recognize an acrostic in it. And I went, and I came across this one, and I saw the letters D, N, R, E, I, and that didn't spell anything for me. So I said, okay, that's not one of his odes. And I went on and on and on, and then okay, I couldn't find one. But then I started thinking, maybe that's not how the ode was written, because this ode has almost like the stanzas are almost like paragraphs. So I thought maybe look at it differently. It does have an acrostic. So if you look at it this way, can you see my hand pointer on there? Good, you can see it. So if you look at it differently, so how it may have been read, you see D, R, N, E, R, S, E, S, I, and then E. Diarin Nersessi et. It is Lord Nersess's. So I thought, wow, I finally found one. And I think, but I'm not sure, is that the manuscript here is not how it was originally written. I think it was written in single lines like this on the left. And then someone later just put it together in paragraph style forms. So I thought I thought it was neat that I found it. And the next page, oops. Okay, here I'm having technical issues, but here are some examples of the various acrostics, various word acrostics that I found in his odes. Simple as Nersess, 6 letters. It is Nersess's, Nersesse e. This song is Nersess's, and here he uses the word yerk, song. The melody of this poem is Nersess's. Here he uses the word pan. I translate that as poem. You can probably come up with different translations for it. But interestingly, the word pan is not included in the ode itself, like as a word meaning poem. It's in there, pan as word, but not as pan as poem. Nersess's praise for the Mother of God. This song is Nersess's P, pure, and that P is short for poch. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on it because we don't have a lot of time, but a poch is like what the scribes used for an antiphon to the ode. An antiphon is like a refrain to an ode. It's usually a different rhythm, a different metrical style. St. Gregory of Narok had some odes or litanies with antiphons or pochs in them, and his were like in the middle of an ode, there was like 4 or 5 lines as an antiphon. With St. Nersess Snorhali, there was an ode and then an entire antiphon or poch afterwards. But just like there was a problem with the different titles, there's also a problem with whether they're polks or not. In some source texts, the same ode, we'll call it an ode for this or that, and other texts will call it a polk, an antiphon. And this one here, it is Nersess's, the Catholicos of Armenians. So here in this one, the acrostic starts in the ode and continues into the antiphon. And this last one was the longest that I found, 53 letters. Nersess's song for the 40 martyrs of God who were perfected in Sebaste. That's quite the antiphon. Let me just check my note. So 60 odes that I translated, 39 of them had what I call a word acrostic, where the letters, the beginning of the stanza, the lines spell out something in words. The other type I call an alphabetic acrostic, and like I say, there might be a better word for that. But in these types, the line or the stanza in sequence follows the Armenian alphabet: I, pen, kim, ta, yetsa, and so on. Out of the 60 odes, 8 of them had this type of acrostic. And then there were 2 out of the 8 I call a doubled alphabetic acrostic, where 2-line stanzas, in each line, ipe, ipe, pen, pen, kim, kim, ta, ta. These were the longest. These were these were the entire alphabet, 36 letters. So this ode here was 72 lines long, and that's the longest one that I came across. So the next poetic feature is alliteration. And alliteration is where the initial sound or initial letter, consonant of a word in a line, that sound or letter will repeat in a line. It's very common in Armenian poetic works, as far as I know, and I think it's because it's easy to do with the Armenian consonants. It's also like it's found in other languages poetry, like Old English. The poem Beowulf is very alliterative, so it's not just Armenian, that's alliteration. So I'm going to let Jesse read some of the lines, and so you can hear what it sounds like. So Jesse, would you read all 3 of the Armenian lines, please?
Sure. Haniv avedavor pararnapar parparastsuk. Sa donitz mezdon yechpark zhogovot zhogov. Vorov mahmerav mahvam kentanvuin gyank takavoriats.
So you can see the sound patterns repeat, and I think that's a feature you see a lot in Armenian poetry. There wasn't any there's no way I can count which ones had it and which one had it. They're scattered throughout. Some stanzas will have it a lot, some stanzas will have it, not so much. And in translating these, Jesse, sometimes pulls his hair out, because I try to be alliterative in my translating, and sometimes you can have fun doing it. Like this word here, fittingly fashioned. I chose 2 words. It's a single Armenian compound word, but I try to make things alliterative, just make it sound a little better. So the next feature is word reduplication. I think there's some scholarly Greek word or Latin word that's what it's called, or sometimes it's called chaining. But I think the best way to explain it is to give an example of it. And if Jesse and I will read like probably 3 or 4 stanzas in alternating English and Armenian, so you can see what it works, and then we'll talk about it. So Jesse, and then we'll go back and forth.
Sure. Nor imne hunchun anteraga yerkvois.
Some new sound is present in this song.
Yerk nerdagagan hoknastelyan rachjan.
A metrical song, a multi-starred festive feast.
Rachjan banzali pazmeranyan karasnativ serpots.
a festive feast for 40 most felicitous and illustrious saints. One more.
Serpots v'gayit zinavorat takavorin yergnits.
For the saints, martyrs, and soldiers of the King of Heaven. So did you pick up the pattern? You have a line that ends in a word, and some form of that word begins the next word. yerk, yerk, song, song, Rockjan, festive feast, Serpote, saints, saints. So that's a feature that's found in some of his poems or some of his odes. It's not very common. Of the 60, only 3 of them had this feature. And I, not being a poet or a writer, I would think that's a difficult thing to do, to write, to plan your words out, that the line's going to end and the next one's going to begin with it. But think of it also as that some of these also have an acrostic. So this one, Nersis, this one has an acrostic. So he has to plan not only that the words repeat, but he also has to plan them so that they match the acrostic. I think that takes a lot of skill. The next feature is anaphora, and here I had to use a Greek. I think it's a Greek word because there's no other way to describe it. Anaphora basically is when the first word of a line or first word of a stanza repeats in each stanza. So here's one. This is from an ode for nativity candlelighting. Eyesore, today. So it's a poetic feature and also has, has use in how you interpret the ode. And we'll talk about a little bit about this one later on. So of the 60 odes, only 2 of them had anaphora, and both of them were eyesore. I believe this became a popular way of writing odes later on, because I think there are a bunch of eyesore works. I know St. Gregory of Narek had at least one work that started with eyesore, but there were only 2 in this collection that I translated. The next feature is refrain. The refrain is pretty easy. It's just basically the opposite of anaphora. It's where something is repeated at the end. So here's an antiphon to a resurrection ode. You have 2-line stanzas. The first line ends in avadik. Second line meds avadik. Good news, great news. Good news, great news. And if you think about this, or if you can picture this, this looks like a song. This looks like something that's going to be sung. It reads exactly like you would read a song. Here's another example of a refrain. This one's from a node with 3-line stanzas, and only the last line has the refrain. O surp yegagetsi, O holy church. So this is a song, this is a node to the church, and each line has the refrain at the end, O holy church. And of the 60 odes that I translated, there were only 3 that had refrains. The next feature is rhyme. Last week, Jesse talked about rhyme in detail and how St. Nersess used rhyme in his works and why some of it was used. What surprised me was that not many of the odes that I translated had rhyme. Let me see my notes here. Out of the 60, only 4 of them had like a regular rhyme in the stanzas. There were a couple other here and there that had rhyme intermittently here and there, but only 4 had a regular pattern of rhyme, which kind of surprised me. And when we at the end, when we talk about examples, some of those we'll come across some that do have rhyme, so you can hear what it sounds like. So these are how I see as the poetic features of the doghs. And now I want to talk a little bit about what was the purpose of these odes. What were they written for? And as I qualified my talk earlier, I don't know for sure why St. Nersess did these, but I'm going to try to figure out why he did based on what he said. So here's these are most likely beginnings of different odes. Come, let us revere him this eve of the Feast of Nativity. Now, on the day of this feast of the naming of the Lord. Come, let us rejoice today on this dominical feast. Come, celebrate the Feast of Vartavar today. So you kind of see a pattern here. They're for feasts. And I translated, of the 60 odes I translated, I broke them down into various subjects pretty much based on their titles. So here we have the main feast, the Dominical feast. You have Feast of Christ, various ones, Nativity, Crucifixion, Resurrection, Vardafar, and you have Feast of the Virgin Mary, and you have Feast for the Holy Church and the Holy Cross. And these are the quantity of odes that were in each category. So you have, for your regular main feast days, there were odes, and then you also have saints' days. And some of these were like saints in general, like martyrs and patriarchs and prophets. Other ones were like specific faiths, specific saints, St. John the Forerunner, St. Gregory the Illuminator. And there was one, this is the one we talked about with the screwy title. The title was To the Holy Trinity, but there's no feast for the Holy Trinity. And based on its content, it was probably sung during the commemoration of angels and heavenly hosts. So they were used for feasts or used at feasts, and this is a educated guess, they were likely used in a liturgical service during those feasts, because most of what the Vartabeds and the Catholico did were for liturgical services. So it was likely that these were actually sung in some type of service. But what were they used for in these services? So let's see what St. Nersess says. Crying out thrice woven melodies to the three-in-one forever always glory. Together with the ranks of blessed martyrs, to you, O glorious kings, we offer glory. With them singing glory to the Trinity, now unto the age and to endless eternity. So the way I saw these odes, the main purpose was to give glory to God, which is very typical in the Armenian churches. Sharagons and liturgies give glory to God. These giving glory to God were not in all the odes, and some of them had, intercession requests and, do this for us kind of thing. But for the most part, I think the purpose was giving glory to God. So now we can go answer the question that we started with. What is a dogh? A dogh is a poetic song of praise that is related to a specific feast or saint's day in the Armenian church that was likely sung during a liturgical service on that day, and that gives glory to God. I think that, in a nutshell, expresses what a dogh is, at least what one of St. Nersess's doghs is, what his odes is. That's it in a nutshell. But that's the nutshell. So let's crack it open and see what's inside, because that's where the interesting stuff comes. So I just did like an outline of what I saw these doghs saying, and not all of them said all the same things, and they said things differently. So since they were for feasts, they had a specific subject matter. The subject matter was the feast, Dominical feast, Christ, Holy Mother of God, Cross and Holy Church, or Saints' Day. And for these feasts, they conveyed certain things. A biblical hagiographic account. Sometimes doghs told stories. And just to sidetrack here, there were a few doghs. There were doghs or odes for Saint Hrepsime and her companions, for King Durtad, and for Saint Gregory. And there's, I think, a total of 4 of them between those 3 odes, or 5 of them. And among those 3 odes, the entire story, the entire traditional story of the conversion of King Durtad to Christianity was told. So you had the martyrdom of the Hrepsimians, you had St. Gregory in a pit, and he was tortured pretty gruesomely in it, and you had King Durtad turned into a boar, and they had to get St. Gregory out of the pit to go save him. So within these odes, the entire story was told. So also, that they don't just tell stories, they also theology of the divine economy of salvation. So that's basically Christ came to earth and was crucified and resurrected so that we are saved. And this is told in these odes. And also in the odes, an explanation of the divine mystery. And explanation is in quotes, because you can't really explain the divine mystery logically. But we'll see how St. Nersess tries to convey it. So these are done using poetic narrative, biblical allegory, analogy, and metaphor, and they're all mixed in. And biblical allegory, in my translation that I'm working with Jesse on, I'm referencing biblical passages, and in the 60 odes, I think I probably have like 320, 325 different biblical references that I'm citing. So these are a Bible story that are in verse. So let's look at some examples, and they're going to be brief examples because it was hard to pick which ones to choose because there's so much good stuff. But I wanted to give a broad example. So this one is from an ode for nativity candlelighting. And Jesse, would you read the first line in Armenian, please?
Այսօր ավետյաց Քապրիելի լրումն եղանի Arguis Mariam.
Today, the fulfillment of Gabriel's good news to the Virgin Mary comes about. This is the Isor one today. First thing, that it's today every single line. And so what it's telling you is that what happened 2,000 years ago, the fulfillment of Gabriel's good news, Christ's birth, nativity, and incarnation and nativity comes about every day we sing this ode. So it happens today. And even this verb, yagani, comes about. That's present tense. Jesse, the next one, please.
Այսօր աներփին իննամսյան աջմամբ արլցյալ հարկանթի գուսին.
Today, the timeless one's 9-month term of growth in the Virgin's womb is completed. This is I'm going to have to think how I want to explain this because this is getting into theology, which is farther removed from my comfort level. I talked about explaining the divine mystery, and explaining what God is very hard to do. It's almost impossible to do it rationally. And one way it's done, not just in Armenian, but in Armenian law too, is with negatives. Anyerpin, timeless one. We don't know what God is like, but we know what God is not. He's timeless. He does not exist in time. And then so that's kind of expressing what God is, abstract. That's difficult enough. Now you get to what does the incarnation mean? That doesn't make sense at all rationally, but you can still express it a little bit. So here we have a timeless one, God, but here we have a finite term, a finite period of time. The timeless one's 9-month term, finite term, is completed. So St. Nersess does this a lot of times with opposites, timeless, completed. And that's one way that you can't explain the mystery of the incarnation, but you can get a sense for it. This next line, today the heavenly king enters into the registry of the earthly king. This is a passage that alludes to Joseph and Mary going to Bethlehem. They go to Bethlehem because the earthly Roman king says, you got to get counted so I can tax you. And because Mary and Joseph went there, today the human race is registered again by that census in the supernal world. So because this happened here, and obviously using opposites, heavenly king, earthly king, because that happened, because of the earthly census, there's the supernal census where we are saved. So he does that a lot. Compares something that happened to something that's going to happen. I picked this next one. Let me just find my place in here. Okay. It's from an ode of good news, and the poetry is very different than the last one. This one is 4-line stanzas. I think there are 7 syllables per line, and there's rhyme in these. So Jesse, would you read the first whole stanza in Armenian, please?
Աստվածածին թավանեմք, ըզնյալդ Աստված քարոզեմք, ընթրաշտագին քեզ քոչեմք, զուրախությունն ավետեմք.
So the emk. And what I like about this is actually the second stanza of the ode. It's all these verbs, these rhyming verbs, they're all first person plural present tense. And in the first stanza, it's made clear that we're singing this ode to Mary, the Mother of God. This is kind of neat because what we're doing here, we're telling Mary what we're doing while we're singing this ode. We profess, we proclaim, to you we cry out, we announce. So we're actually singing to Mary and telling her what we're doing. And then the next stanza is almost the opposite. And just to save on time, I'm just going to read the English. Exult, tabernacle of the light. Be gladdened, temple of the sun. Rejoice, throne of God, bearer of the word most high. So this is almost the opposite, because all these verbs here are imperative. Here we're telling Mary what we want her to do. We want her to exult. We want her to be gladdened. We want her to rejoice. So I thought that was a nice counterpoint to we're telling her what we do, and we're telling her what we want her to do while we're singing this ode. And this next stanza, I'm not going to read the English, but here are some of the opposites that describe the mystery of this. This is the mystery of the incarnation of Christ in Mary's womb. The uncontainable, that's Christ, the negative, uncontainable, stopped in her womb. The Son lodged in her womb. The dreadful flame dwelled in her womb. And I got a place of her womb was a place of incarnation of the immaterial world. And even though this running short time, Jesse, read that last line, the last stanza, please.
Anut panim marmnaran.
So one of the nice things about classical Armenian, it's very concise language. So you have 3 words, 7 syllables. And the best that I could do is like 7 words and 15 syllables to translate it. So just you can't match classical Armenian in English too well. It just doesn't work. This next one's from an ode for the cross. This one, the meter's different. 2-line stanzas. I think there are 14 syllables per line. And these little marks here, which are not in the text themselves, they're pauses in the meter. So the meter's designed to be read, half of it, pause, half of it. So Jesse, read the whole first stanza, please.
Nor trachtin yegeretvo, zarganats dangyali mech. Zorvoch krov peiv pagyal, al turahub imench.
The tree of life was planted in the midst of the new garden of the church, which the cherubim did not lock, but was readily approachable by us. Let me check my notes. So somewhere recently I read that the cross is the defining symbol of the Armenian faith. And that's correct, but that's not correct, because the cross is more than just a symbol. I mean, and what the cross is for Armenians, some of it is expressed by St. Nersess. And this line, this two-line stanza says so much. So we have a new garden of the church. So first you have the old garden of Eden, and mankind sinned. So mankind was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and they can't approach the tree of life because the cherubim are locking it and keeping us out. But now the cross is the tree of life. The cross is planted in the new garden. The new garden is the church. The cherubim are not locking the church, and we can readily approach the cross, which is the tree of life. And just that's so much that's just amazing. I was editing this, when I was editing my slideshow, I deleted the Armenian of the next stanza, so I'm just going to read the English. The one I just talked about was kind of complicated. I think the next one is beautiful, and it's just so simple and understanding. And the poetry, there's such a symmetry to the poetry that just says everything. On Golgotha, a ladder was raised, revealed by the vision of Jacob, for angels' descent to earth, for mankind's ascent to heaven. I just think that's a wonderful, beautiful stanza that doesn't need explaining. The next one is from an antiphon to this ode, and here the meter's different. There's no pause, and these I think are 12-syllable lines instead of 14. Just to save time, I'm going to read read the English. He who dissolved the binding of death by being bound on you, beg him to release us from the bonds of sin. So the first thing that you need to be aware of is on you. You is the cross. We're speaking to the cross here because Christ was crucified on the cross, and because of his death, the binding of death was dissolved on you. But what we're doing is kind of profound, that we're begging the cross, beg him, Christ, to release us from the bonds of sin. That's something that I don't know if other theological traditions have, but something I came across, and actually came across in the Hamaya, and I translated, is a word called anparpar parechos, voiceless intercessor. It's kind of like an oxymoron because you're asking someone without a voice to put in a good word for you, but that's exactly what we're doing here. We're asking the cross, you, to beg Christ to release us from the bonds of sin because Christ died on the cross. I think that's pretty profound, and I think just how it's expressed in this ode is pretty amazing. So this one is from an ode for the sons of thunder. The sons of thunder, I can't say that. James and John, the son of Zebedee, and they were given that name by Christ for whatever reason. These two stanzas are later on in the ode, and time-wise or historically-wise, James has already been martyred. John lived a long time, and John the apostle is believed to be the author of the gospel according to John. So this is talking about him writing his gospel. He remained in the world a herald of the word of truth. With the voice of good news from heaven, the living word rang out. And the next one I'm going to ask Jesse to read the Armenian because it's necessary.
Fanen vor Astված, iskespane ar Astված հայր, Znunt misht ein, vorov yegen kuikas hankoitz.
The word which was God from the beginning with God the Father, offspring of the ever-existent one, through whom beings came to be from non-existent. So the first line there, you kind of should recognize it. The first line is basically John 1:1-1:2. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was from God, and in the beginning was the Word was from God, and the Word was God. But this is just a little worded a little differently. And the next one is very, very abstract, and that kind of relates to John 1:3. I'm not going to really get into it, but this line is very abstract. This line is very difficult to understand, but also John's chapter 1 of the gospel according to John was also somewhat difficult to understand, and this is representing what he said, but doing it in a poetic form. So just going to quickly talk about this one and then go to my last one because we're getting short on time. Oops. This one is from an ode for John the Forerunner. And John the Forerunner, or John the Baptist. I'll just read it. For the one who emptied himself from ineffable glory, for the one circumscribed in the virgin's womb, you were greeted by life from the elderly one's sterile womb. I think this is one of the most beautiful phrases in the ode. You were greeted by life. That's just such a wonderful expression. And this is talking about John the Baptist being conceived in his barren mother's womb. And the whole reason he was conceived, the whole reason he was greeted by life was for Christ, for the one who emptied himself from ineffable glory. That's Philippians chapter 2, I think, for the one circumscribed in the virgin's womb. So the whole purpose of John being conceived in and being born was for Christ. And that's expressed right here. And then the next one is the beginning of John's life and the end of John's life. With leaping in her womb you were born, with dancing you were perfected. So leaping in her womb, when Mary tells Elizabeth that Gabriel came to her and says, I'm going to bear Christ, John leaped in the womb at the beginning of John's life. End of life, Salome danced in front of Herod and enticed him for John's head, and John lost his head, was martyred. He was perfected because of dancing. So beginning and end of John's life, all in one line. So I'm going to skip to the end because we're running out of time. And this last one, it's an ode for a martyr, and this ode for a martyr doesn't really, it's not like the other ones. It doesn't really tell a story of the martyr. There's not a lot of biblical analogies in it. There's not a lot of theology in it. What it has is, I think, beautiful words. So Jesse and I are going to read the whole thing Armenian English, and I hope my words, translating words, did some justice to St. Nersess's words. And whatever we're skipping over, when you get the book, everything that's in here is going to be in the book. So Jesse, would you read, please?
You want to switch off stanzas?
Yes.
Hanjarer shnor halit andriale, harkait zorat zarmeye, mez barkev itanen latine, harashtag rashaker repsime.
Sagacious, graceful, chosen she is. From a line of mighty kings she is. To us a gift from the Latin house, wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime.
Rahahort urevor yergnentats, orinats yergnainuin chorazkats, uratial zansen yevis pares haireniats, hashtag rashaker repsime.
Wayfarer, wanderer, traveler of heaven, profoundly perceptive of the heavenly law, having renounced self and glory of patrimony, wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime.
Imastun surp gusan kerharko, harov panin I hergir argelo, varetser izlapter havado, hashtag rashaker repsime.
Wise Holy Virgin, most revered, with fire of the word cast upon earth, you ignited the lantern of faith. Wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime.
Pesain Christosi marmnatial, anaba gusutiam harsen antial, harakast anmaduits paz metial, hashtag rashaker repsime.
Oh, the bridegroom Christ made flesh, perfect in virginity, you became bride. Upon the unapproachable nuptial couch you reclined, wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime. Jesse, did you see
Sorry.
it?
Sira sanunt tira mark sakhrali, nirpapail vosketel darpali, yerabasag yurakluch tangali, hashtag rashaker repsime.
Wonderful peacock nourished lovingly, desirable, delicately shining thread of gold, yearned for, anointed with a triple crown, wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime.
Iskajem agavni otabar, nor noyan dabanne koyet tatar, otsaspan arakil tu artar, hashtag rashaker repsime.
Truth-seeking dove dancing in air, the new Noah's Ark is your abode. You, righteous, serpent-killing stork, wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime.
Medavor mardiros mertsagan, eagan panin hor zorutian, liagoch kachutiam izhansan, hashtag rashaker repsime.
A fiercely contending intelligent martyr of the existent word of the Father's power, fully trodden the wine vat with courage, wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime.
E kuner tatavial I posor, sagartun gamrorag iper chansor, hars nazniv tu aryam kogavor, hashtag rashaker repsime.
She is beautifully colored, stained in wine red, verdant, red-colored like an apple tree. You, the gentle bride, veiled with blood, wondrously beautiful angel Hripsime. And thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew, for that great dive into the dogs of St. Nersess. I really think we all learned something from this tonight. I certainly was on the edge of my seat listening to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope you learned something. I hope I wasn't too tongue-tied.
Not at all, not at all. That was very expertly delivered. Thank you. I'm now going to share my screen for the closing prayer, and when you're ready, please read it.
Անունոր եւ որդվո եւ օգնույն սրբո ամեն ամենախնամ դեր մեր աչքերուն բահաբան թիր քու երգյուղդ որ չնայինք այլևս արադավոր փանիմը որ մեր ագանչներովը չախորժինք լսել չարության խոսքեր մեր փերաններովը սուտ չխոսենք մեր սրդերովը չարություն չխորհինք մեր ցերկերովը անիրավություն չկործենք եւ մեր ոտքերովը չերթանք անօրենության ջամփաներով, այլ ուղղե անոնց շարժումները, որը լան միշտ քու բադվիրաններու թամացայն եւ ողորմե քու արարածներուտ եւ մեզի բազմամեղներուս ամեն. All provident Lord, place your holy all as a guard before our eyes, that they may no longer look lustfully. Before our ears, that they may not delight in hearing evil words. Before our mouths, that they may speak no falsehood. Before our hearts, that they may think no evil. Before our hands, that they may do no injustice. Before our feet, that they may not walk in the paths of iniquity, but direct their movement so that they may always be according to all your commandments. Have mercy upon your creatures and upon us, manifold sinners. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So as you see on the screen, these are our upcoming sessions. And Hovannes Sargavak, who just read the prayer, will be our next speaker on September 12th. I invite you all to join us, and thank you once again for being with us tonight. Hope you all have a pleasant evening and good rest of your week. Thank you.